Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. I should start off with a programming note, I guess. We're trying out a new recording schedule where we record both the Wednesday show and the Friday show on Wednesday. And I feel like I need to explain that because if people watch the video clips, they're going to look at the Friday show and they're going to think, did Rob and Chad ever change their clothes?
I actually thought about Rob this morning bringing a change of clothes for that exact reason. So I'm glad you explained that.
We'll just explain it. Chad and I do shower regularly and change our clothes. But Chad's not so sure about that. I shower every day and change my clothes. It's just that we're recording both of these on the same day, which also means when I introduce our guests, I should acknowledge the teasing I just took in the last episode because I was calling him Representative Boschee, and he's not Representative Boschee. In my defense, he was at one point. In fact, he was the House Minority Leader at one point, but now he's in the Senate chamber where he's a junior. Do you lose seniority when you move to the Senate chamber? Where they're like, back of the bus now, kid?
Oh, I mean, with the small caucus that we have, we all get to wield the power we have regardless of how long we've served. So,
but do you lose your parking privileges? Like, how far back are you in the parking lot as a freshman senator?
That's a good question. Again, things that I don't care about, but I guess that's probably easy to say too, because I was the assistant leader my first session of the Senate. So got premium parking there, but I don't know. I'd have to ask Senator Roars that. She's the one responsible for assigning parking.
What a job.
I did forget for a minute that there's just 5 Democrats in the Senate caucus. So it's not a bus so much. It's more like you have to sit in the middle seat in the back of the Prius. Is that how it is?
A little bit. You ask a lot of people. We still drove the bus this last legislative session and got a lot of good things done. So no matter what the size of the car, we can get there.
That is the sort of witty repartee that will get you all the way Senate Minority Leader. I'm sorry. I don't know. We're off the rails. We're like 2 minutes into
that might have been one of my favorite moments of the podcast is Josh just bringing the haymaker, like the quickness, Josh Boschee. Atta boy.
Boy. We brought him on not to make jokes, but to talk about property tax rollout. And it's been kind of, the interesting dynamic now about it's the legislature. The bill that passed, the 2 big bullet points are primary residence owners in North Dakota get a $1,600 credit. And we're capping local spending at 3%. And there's some exemptions to that. You can go to voters and get approval to break the cap. There's also some exemptions for existing spending commitments and things like that. The way local governments are reacting to this now is interesting. And I think really what happened, because the legislature did what they did. And I think now we have a fundamentally different debate about property taxes than we did. And we've really had over maybe the last 20, 30 years. We have a cap in place now. So now the question becomes, how do local governments deal with it? And it's been a little interesting to watch. Josh, as you've been watching, you've voted for the bill, supported the bill. What has your been reaction? You're kind of watching how it gets rolled out and you watch various local governments, local entities respond to it.
Yeah, well, I have a front seat to the city of Fargo, and that's where I've primarily been watching and how they've responded and reacted. And, certainly that 3% cap was something that most legislators, myself included, not necessarily the 3%, but setting some sort of cap was important because as much as we have tried in the last decade or 12 years in my service in the state legislature, we've tried to educate voters that property tax is a local issue. Yet it continues to be put on our plate in Bismarck. And so now that we have given significant property tax relief to primary residence owners, we've told local governments that they have to figure out how to not to make sure things don't happen that have happened in the past in terms of increased evaluations and people feeling that increase and the locals getting to use that to fund their priorities. And that's where I think we're at now in the locals is really what are our priorities? I represent North Fargo and downtown Fargo. And we are now hearing that one of the proposals would be to close one of our north side branches of the library. That is certainly stirring a hornet's nest in North Fargo, where we've already seen changes to our local elementary schools. Our senior center on the north side is being talked about being closed by the Park District. So here we have a dense property tax base of established homes of people who have been paying in and want services now maybe having to consider cuts in our neighborhoods. Because I think the locals have really had to not make, let me rephrase that. The locals haven't made the tough decisions they've needed to make over the last 10 years because we've had economic growth in our communities. Home sales have gone up across the state, energy boom, tech boom. All our industries are doing fairly well, even at different points where the rest of the country felt hits. And then COVID relief money. And so now they're having to make the tough decisions, and those are tough discussions for us all to be having. But part of that is looking at what is their responsibility and keeping property taxes in line.
So, Josh, one of the things that I think is really interesting is that not all political subs are created equal. Sometimes we talk very generally that they're all the same, but I think Cass County is a perfect example. You said West Fargo come out with their city budget. They're below the 3% cut. They made decisions to not add additional staff people, those kind of things. And then you have Fargo where the sky is falling, right? We're going to shut down libraries. We're going to do all these things. Would you elaborate a little bit more on that last point you made? I don't believe the city of Fargo got themselves into a financial situation just because of this property tax cap being put in place. So why is Fargo and West Fargo different? But it just seems like, I mean, again, the mayor in West Fargo is like, thank you for passing this bill. We'll be able to be under the 3% with no problem. And then I hear city commissioners in Fargo.
And by the way, by being under that 3%, they can bank some for future cycles.
But we're closing libraries, all these different things. I mean, it's really, in the words of Rob Port earlier with another thing, draconian cuts to the city budget in Fargo. Why the difference?
There's some significant difference. Well, first of all of our communities, again, are coming off of having COVID dollars. And we saw first where schools and cities were the first to burn through their money because they put it to work, right? They needed to put it to work. The state, for instance, we are just expiring the last of our COVID relief dollars. And again, we had oil as a way to backstop some of that, so we didn't need to flush it out like other states right away. So there's some of that. We're done with that COVID high. The other thing, and this is just me speaking off the cuff without any research, but the difference between Fargo and West Fargo is West Fargo is pretty landlocked right now. They aren't growing still. We are. That doesn't mean they still don't have expenses because of the growth they've had over the last decade, but Fargo is still now growing south and even a little bit north, along with some of our infill. And so there's still ongoing expenses that have to be addressed with part of that growth. But with that, again, I don't think some of the tough decisions have been made in terms of when you look at some of our city departments, the growth that has happened. We had to, our firefighters and law enforcement went to the voters and said, make sure that we are prioritized by having our own funding stream. And so now we have a sales tax dedicated to them. And so they're getting to be left out of some of this conversation versus my home city of Minot, who, the threat was that fire services was going to be the first on the chopping block or part of the chopping block. I shouldn't say first. And so I really think it's just the nuances of our different communities, but also when you look at the different political subdivisions. I had a conversation early this last week, with a city commissioner in West Fargo, and someone who serves on the park board. The headline in the forum was that the park district was, I can't remember if it was the mills were going down or whatnot, but they weren't going to be receiving as much money and they were fine with that. Well, the difference is that, a park district is responding to the assets that they already have or the facilities that they already provide, and they can make a decision not to grow future assets. Whereas a city still needs to put in water and sewer and roads, law enforcement, snow removal, garbage pickup, all these things that make our city run. And we're fortunate in Fargo, and I think throughout Cass County, of having amazing city services. And we're used to that. I see that night and day when I go to other communities like Bismarck and Minot, which I frequent regularly. They have a different ethos. I shouldn't say ethos. They have a different prioritization of some of those services, especially when I think of like snow removal. It's night and day between Fargo and the city of Bismarck, but that's what these two communities have prioritized. And so now we're having conversations about what do those priorities look differently.
It's nice to have amazing services, but those services cost money. One of the things when we talk about growth, and I actually had a reader email me this in response to a column that you also responded to, Josh, about sort of tax exemptions. And the point the reader made is we talk about growth and the expenses, but we also forget growth expands the tax base too. You develop more property, that's more value that's on the tax rolls that can be taxed and produces revenue. So growth produces revenue too, which I think sometimes we forget when we're crying the blues. But specifically about growth, a lot of the growth though happens under the auspices of tax exemptions. And specifically, I wrote about one for single family homes, but there's all sorts of other ones. But in Fargo, they have a 2-year, and I should have my article in front of me, but I think it was like $125,000 or $150,000 exemption where they're exempting that much value from the taxable value of the home. And I went through and did the math, and I counted up the building permits that were issued by the city for single family homes and everything. And I came up with, this is costing the city $1.6 million a year. This tax exemption for 2 years for single property owners. And by the way, they're encouraging the sort of growth that increases the amount of services that have to be provided. To me, that looks like the front of the next big debate about property taxes, is all the ways we use property taxes, exemptions specifically from property taxes, to incent economic development, but what that does to the tax base. Because I have a feeling we have gotten carried away with it. I think we have narrowed the tax base to grow things that then put more pressure on that tax base. And I think that is kind of the beating heart to the property tax problem right now.
And, that was my response to your article you wrote. And, first of all, for those that don't know, I'm a real estate broker. So I'm in the real estate industry. I help people build new homes. I help people buy homes and sell homes. It's always, and this may not make me popular within my colleagues in the real estate community and the home builder community in our region, but in the back of my mind, I've certainly supported the work that our organizations, the Association of Realtors and the home builders, have done to make sure that we have that new construction property exemption moving forward. But now, as you said, Rob, the state is ponying in up to $1,600 in property tax relief from the bottom up to homeowners for primary residences.
And really more, I hate to interject, really more than that, though, when you look at all the other ways that the state has bought down property taxes in the past.
Social services and
the latest.
Right. And so I think because of that gives local communities like the city of Fargo an off-ramp so that they can address their budget concerns or prioritize the things that our residents want by taking that exemption potentially off the books. Because the state is now, whether people like it or not, whether my legislative colleagues like it or not, we're picking up the tab. And I really, based on the numbers you had put in your article, and I've not done any verification beyond that, but, that $1,600 wipes out most of that exemption that's already happening. And so I don't think that the property owners are going to feel it the way that some may think. And I certainly wouldn't advocate that we stack things on top of it for those new homes. Because of what I see in my industry, my practice. I talk to my friends that are lenders. I've experienced it with my clients who are building their first home. That exemption is a 2-year exemption, and it's a great resource for those individuals and those families to get into that new home. But they always forget at year 2 that that check is coming due. The lender has budgeted for it in their escrow. They have signed waivers or disclosures from many parties saying, now remember, in 2 years, this is coming off, so prepare and budget and plan accordingly. But then generally year 2, we start hearing from those homeowners as their agents saying, what happened? Why are my taxes going up? And then we try to remind them of they were able to benefit from a property tax exemption for new construction. And then by then, they have a sour taste in their mouth already because they forgot or didn't plan ahead.
Josh, I'm going to push back on something that you said earlier. This idea that the legislature has sort of taken on property taxes, and it's actually political subs who are in charge of property taxes. That is true. But one of the actions of the legislature often affects the political subs' ability and what they have to do in terms of increasing property taxes. I'm in the K through 12 world. We often talk about, hey, if the legislature would fully fund K through 12, then the locals wouldn't have to raise property taxes as much. I was talking to somebody recently about Fargo and this budget situation there, and they said, well, if the state would do more on social services to help with the homeless population and some of these things, then Fargo wouldn't be in this budget situation. So is the legislature giving on one hand with these $600 to property tax owners, but then at the same time not properly funding some local services that could help people reach that 3% cap? I mean, I guess my overall point, should the state be investing more in locals to help them not have to raise property taxes? Because Fargo's a city. I mean, that's unique in North Dakota. It's got city problems now. And does the legislature get that?
Does the legislature get that? I don't know if I'll answer that right away, but I do agree. I think the state has a responsibility to help with different programs so that they don't become required by the locals. I think of all the work I did this last session and the advocates in housing did for the last 2 years around increased housing dollars for affordable housing. This has been a crisis Fargo and some other communities throughout the state have faced for a while. Now, almost every community in the state is dealing with unhoused people, with people who can't afford staying in they're renting their apartments or staying in their homes. And so the state stepped up, and that was because more communities are feeling that than just the city of Fargo. And so, yes, I think there needs to be a better job of the state looking at things like social services and looking at how do we deliver those services and who's responsible for that. But we also have to remember, I'm looking at this I'll use the reference of a dawn of the fact that, this was our first session where we really got concerned about whether oil was going to be sustainable or not for us in terms of a revenue source. And as we continue to take on more and support more at the local level, whether that's roads, water projects, education, social services, we also have to look to make sure, do we have the revenue coming in? Are our revenue sources diverse enough? We as a rural Republican-led conservative state love to beat our chest about being a low-tax state. Part of the reason we can be low tax is because the federal government, up until recently, was writing a lot of checks to us. And we're seeing where that may not be the case as the feds try to push more autonomy to the states. But with that autonomy, just like with the locals, in our viewpoint, might mean that we have to look differently in how we budget and our revenue streams and our expenses.
I think it gets back to something we talk about a lot on this show is you have to pay for the things you get. When just a moment ago, Josh was talking about, Fargo's got great city services. I don't live in Fargo, but I believe that. And the thing is that costs money. And the same at the state level where we pay for a lot of things. But everything costs money. And I think especially we've hidden so much of it. I think at the federal level, we hide so much state spending in the federal budget deficits. Like everything kind of flows up there and Congress finances it all because all the different members of Congress want spending in their states. And then we finance it with national debt. And then at the state level, we don't run debt in deficits because we can't, but we hide a lot of it in oil tax revenue because we have this, golden goose that keeps laying the eggs. But that's not going to last forever. So where's the revenue going to come from after that? We do need to be thinking about that. And the taxpayers have to be thinking, there's got to be a point where the give and take because I think we haven't, both in North Dakota with the oil money and at the federal level with the national debt, we haven't been asking voters to do like cost benefit analysis. Like it'd be great to have this swimming pool for the city, but this is what it's going to cost you. We haven't been doing that a lot of times. Maybe a swimming pool is probably a bad example, but I mean, at some point it's like, it's nice to have all these tax exemptions, but maybe we can't afford them. Maybe we're better served by a broad tax base. These are the conversations we have to have. And in some ways, I think something like the 3% cap, I think it's a healthy thing. I think some of these headaches we're going to be going through, there really will be headaches in some communities, depending on the situations they're in. I think it's a healthy thing. It's time for us to eat our broccoli a little bit.
Well, and I go back to what I think about, again, our community, specifically in Fargo. When it has come to our schools and education, yes, we depend on the state's significant support, but almost every time the city of the Fargo Public Schools has taken something to the voters, overwhelmingly, our voters have said, yes, we want to make sure our schools are safe and we're going to update HVAC, or we want to make sure that we're providing ancillary services that meet all the needs of our community. And so the voters have stepped up locally here when they've been asked to do so. The challenge we're going to face now is, and this is a nuance of passing the final version of that tax bill in the 11th hour of the session, was there's only one vote every 2 years that can happen on that. So before, some of the language said that vote could happen during the primary or the general election. Now it just says it can only be in the general election. So if that vote were to fail, we don't have an opportunity to go back to the voters a second time within that same calendar year to say, hey, okay, we trimmed it back, or we listened and this is the way we're going to prioritize it. Now it's a 2-year wait to be able to do some of those things. And so those are some nuances we can fix either in a special session or in the next session. But again, I come from a community where our voters have generally done a good job of taxing themselves for the services in the community that they want. But we do know that was getting to a tipping point based on valuations and property tax revenue. And you're right, the locals now have to look at themselves and those local decision makers in terms of what are we going to prioritize? Do we grow our communications team, or do we make sure that there's enough snowplows out on the street during an emergency? And that's hard, right? Reading about the city budget, I don't envy them. This last year we had a mild year, and so everyone's talking about how much money was saved on gas and in time and overtime and in person hours in terms of moving snow. But this next year we could have 6 blizzards in a row and we blow through the budget in the first few months, right? So I think providing flexibility with those caps and making sure that we understand the nuance of local government is important too.
As a member of the news media, I appreciate your call out of the communications department at the city of Fargo, because it is absurd.
I will say I cheerlead them in the fact that I love the content. I love learning. I learned something the other day about the auditor's office, and I was talking to my neighbor who works there. I was like, I didn't know that's what you guys did. So I think there's some important functions there. There are some things that they probably need to make a decision on what they're going to prioritize as far as what they communicate to the public and what they don't. So I think there's value. It's just a matter of, again, we're at a different time where now the state is ponying more money to help cover property taxes or provide relief. And our locals have to decide what they're going to do within the budget restrictions that have been placed on them.
So Josh, I hate to pick on Fargo, but it feels like the cap is, them and Minot, where there's been the most talk of it. But is Fargo having a conversation? It's like, well, we're going to close the library. We're going to cut all these services. I mean, they still have the option of raising sales tax, right? Or other things. Are there conversations about raising other taxes and fees to pay for these things? Or again, often I feel like when we talk about the federal budget or other things, we just talk about cuts. We don't talk about revenue enhancements, and it's got to be a two-way thing. But is that a conversation that's taking place?
Yes, certainly the mayor has talked about within the budget potentially, again, these are all proposals, the department heads came to the city commissioners and the mayor and said, which I want to put an asterisk in that and come back to that process, but with suggestions of where they could trim. And so that's where some of these concerns come from. And no decision has been made by the city of Fargo yet. That comes in the next month. But yes, the mayor has talked about, increasing fees. I can't remember if it's our water fee or trash disposal fee as a way to increase revenue. Sales tax, I have not heard anything specific there. I do know we are getting, if we aren't already at the top of within the state, just because again, voters have said yes. We funded our diversion. We're funding law enforcement and safety. There's road projects and things like that. Voters expanded and approved a lodging tax increase for the city of Fargo that the city of West Fargo doesn't have. So that's to build a new convention center. So again, those things I think are there, and it'll be part of the discussion. But what that looks like in terms of the end of the city budget, we'll see, I guess, in a month. I do want to go back to, one of the reasons we know about these concerns is until a year or two ago, these meetings, the finance committee meetings, were not public. The finance committee meetings in the city of Fargo were held, in private. I don't want to say secret, but in private. So it wasn't until the budget was laid in front of the city commissioners at a city meeting by the mayor that anyone would have any glimpse into these things. So the fact that the discussion is now at least 2 months public going into a proposed budget, I think is good for voters of Fargo or the residents of Fargo to be able to understand, again, how are we a part of this conversation instead of just 5 people making a decision within a month based on information they received from the mayor.
Yeah, I think that's so right. And again, it gets back to, we talk about local leaders having to look at themselves, but really the voters have to look at themselves. Like, your expectations have to be reasonable. If you expect these services, there's a bill that goes with it. If you want the bill to go lower, you're going to have to get rid of some of the services. That's reality. That's the light that we have to live with. And I'm glad it's going. You mentioned something, if you could get back to the legislature a little bit. And we're talking about, the federal government's, starting to roll back, and I support much of it because, again, we're $37 trillion in debt at the national level. We got to do something. But how's the state prepared for this? I know there was talk about a special session. I don't know if we're going to get one or not, but some people seem to think we are, others don't. But how are you looking? How is North Dakota prepared for, the federal government, and understanding that some of this may be unexpected? Certainly, as we've seen with some grants and stuff, things are happening very chaotically. Right. But how prepared do you think we are for federal cuts?
To begin with, our legislative council staff have done a good job of preparing us with memos and proposals based on the proposed text of the bill. Now that we have the bill and it's passed and it's been signed by the president, we actually know what's in the bill and what that, so that analysis is going forward to see how much of that is adjusted. So, headlines a month ago, we're saying $100 million in cuts to the state of North Dakota. We'll see, is that number going to be higher or lower? For folks that don't know, within that bill, all the conversation around Medicaid, they hid those cuts for 2 years from now, whereas the cuts to SNAP and some of these other programs are going to start right away. So it really comes down to, do we have the political will to try to fix things around social services versus if it was just healthcare and hospitals closing? Some of the decisions we have more time to see how they play out or see what the potential impacts are. And then the others are going to be much more, I think, dire and for us to really decide, do we need to go back in and fix things? We are in a good budget position. Again, working, I made the jab earlier about the Democratic caucus driving the bus. We worked and were part of the ruling majority with the mainstream Republicans to make sure we had a good budget. We have money in reserves. So, the governor has some leniency within about 5% of the budget to whether call on cuts at the agency level or, some discretionary funds that we can see what can be moved around through the emergency commission. So we're in a good position to be able to address them. For me, are we going to have the political will to call ourselves back in if we need to address things like SNAP or other programs versus just the healthcare cuts that we'll be feeling in 2 to 3 years from now?
Hey, Josh, now I'm going to take us back to Fargo after we went to the state legislature for a minute. Fargo's potentially, for sure is going to change the way they do elections. They have to because of the state banned approval voting. But also, I think you're supportive of the change to the ward system for city government in Fargo. Can you talk about both of those things? One, the getting rid of approval voting, but then what does this ward structure look like, and why are you supportive? Why is this better for the people of Fargo?
So, first of all, the voters, I think it was 2018 in Fargo, instituted approval voting. So we've had several elections where we've been able to elect our city leaders based on approval voting. I was an advocate of it. I continue to support it. I think it's a way that can help us build more cohesion during a campaign versus divisiveness. If you think about it, if you're running for an office, instead of me trying to steal people's or trying to differentiate myself too much from someone when I'm running, if I can pull some of their voters to vote for me on top of my voters, I'm building consensus. And I think we saw that. We in our elections. So disappointed that has happened. But
I rolled my eyes a little bit at the idea that approval voting is going to make politics less of a mudslinging game.
Well, I mean, again, I saw it on the ground here. We were able to get people elected with closer to 30% of the vote than 12 or 10% of the vote. We at least got a better idea of who people were supporting, versus anything else. In regards to the proposed change, so we are collecting signatures to move Fargo to a council form of government, similar to what all the other cities, or most of the other cities in the state are at, the big cities. Fargo is the largest city in the country that is still a commission formed, meaning that everyone's elected at large. So with the creation of the wards, we'll first of all, the proposal asks to add 2 new commissioners. So we'd have a total of 6 commissioners and a mayor. And then those 6 council members would be at some point assigned and then elected by wards. So that different geographies, similar to a legislative district, would elect. The mayor would become what's classified as a strong mayor. So the mayor would not have a vote unless they're breaking a tie, and they would have a veto. So again, the idea there is that the mayor is leading the commission or the council and the city to build consensus versus just being, a co-equal to the other commissioner or council members, and having an equal vote to them. So we'll see. We still have a couple thousand more signatures to get to get that on the ballot, but then the voters of Fargo will get to decide if that's what our city government looks like or not.
And would that be a special election, Josh, or would that be on do we know when that would be on?
Yeah, so there's conflict between the city charter and state statute in what that process looks like. It's my understanding that the Fargo city attorney has determined that we will follow state statute, which states then once the signatures are submitted, within 60 to 90 days of those submissions, a special election will be held.
It's weird that Fargo's going to follow the law one time and not its own.
You are so snarky about the great city of Fargo.
I love Fargo. I think Fargo's great. Fargo's city government drives me a little nuts sometimes. I will say though, as the other larger community in the state that has at-large city government.
By the way, Bismarck has at-large too.
Oh, do they? Oh, okay. The Minot has it, and we actually went in that direction several years ago now, and I think it was a mistake. I mean, at the time we had wards, and we had 2 people elected from each. So we had 16 council members plus the mayor. And it was too much, and we had to change something. So we went to at large. We have 5 we still call it the city council, but it's a commission, 5 members. And I think that was I think we overcorrected. So I think we should keep the same number and then just go to wards. I think that was probably the way to go. So I think Fargo's probably moving in the right direction on that one.
Josh, who draws the lines?
So that is based on the language we've drafted or that's been drafted. The city commission will determine. The goal is not to have the city commission draw the lines, but for them to, we'll put pressure on them if this passes to appoint an independent body of people to draw those lines based on population. And similar to my time on the redistricting committee in the legislature, there's some guidelines that we would encourage folks to follow to make sure they're contiguous. Well, actually, I think that's already in the language that they have to be contiguous, that they have to be reasonable, and things like that. What excites me, if some people bring up the parochialism that comes with awards, and that certainly will be true, just like legislative districts. But I think that'll be rare and brief. I think what I'm excited about.
Either parochialism's not always bad. either.
Exactly. And especially when we talk about things like growth, and, I'm in a core community where we want to make sure we have services equal to what's happening in growth areas. But what excites me about it is I think the responsiveness of city council members to constituents. I consider myself a very engaged legislator with my district. My district knows me. I know most of my district. That's because we go and hold forums and we communicate regularly during session. We don't see that much with city commission currently, mostly because all four of them, and then the mayor, represent all 125,000 people throughout the state. So I asked former commissioners, I was like, who responds to the email when they email all five of you about their trash pickup? Or how do you decide? And there, really comes down to sometimes there's commissioners that are good at responding and others that aren't. This way, at least I would know who my commissioner is or council member is to go to first. And if they're not responsive, then I can have a conversation with my neighborhood about them not being responsive to our needs or our requests. And again, responsiveness doesn't mean that they do what I ask them to do. It's just making sure that I'm heard or they acknowledge that they've, or given me a reason why they will or won't do something is an important part of that conversation too.
No, it is. And again, I think Fargo's moving in the right direction with that. I think drawing the lines thing is always a mess because it's always, we want somebody who's free of bias to draw the line. I had somebody email me the other day and they were like, well, why don't we just have AI draw the lines? And I'm like, you think AI is unbiased? We just had AI on Twitter. It was just Hitler for like a hot minute. So I don't know. I'm glad I never have to draw those lines because I think it's one of those things. I do have to write news articles that never make anybody happy. So maybe I do understand it a little bit. But I think
recently in a podcast you thought I should write draw the lines because you trust me immensely.
I would support that mostly because I'd like to watch you squirm through that process. I think that'd be very. I want you to have to do it on live stream too, and like
drawing the lines again. Going back to my time on the legislative redistricting committee is really easy if you follow principles. We will use major highways. We will use major roadways. We will, those are all things that it's when you get into here's a little carve out because so-and-so lives in this neighborhood in this 6-block radius off of 32nd Avenue that just gets you in trouble. I mean, I give kudos again to the work, the way we did it in the redistricting committee was kind of those legislators that represent different quadrants of the state kind of took leadership of theirs. So it was myself, Senator Sorvag, and Representative Schauer from West Fargo that had Cass County. And I'm proud of the work that we did because we stuck to that principle. We wanted people to be able to say, do you live north of 13th Avenue or south of 13th? Because we know people don't know they're in District 26 or 24 what their number is, but they know where they live in the community. And when you go look at the map in Cass County where we fit 11 districts in, almost everything is on a major thoroughway. And we did even a better job of making sure that most districts stopped at Fargo, West Fargo. There's a couple that cross over. So people know I live in Fargo, I live in West Fargo, so that narrows the districts down.
I did not mean to open up a can of worms. We don't need to litigate. Well, there's already enough litigation going on with the, we're going to end it there. Josh, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Josh Boschee.
Thanks. Appreciate the conversation and we'll talk soon.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Senator Josh Boschee. I got to emphasize the senator because I got to retrain my brain now that he's in the state Senate.
You should just call him J-Bo, and then you don't have to remember what his title is.
Senator J-Bo. Which I didn't know. This is the first time I ever heard anybody call him J-Bo. And apparently it's been like 20 years and nobody has called him J-Bo to me before. So,
you don't run in the hip circles.
I'm the media, so I don't get invited to any of the fun circles.
You don't get invited to the nickname parties.
I probably have some fun nicknames at those parties that I also, let's, the property tax thing I think is very, very interesting. Do you agree with me? I feel like the next sort of debate is exemptions. I really think we've got to retool some of this. And the economic development people are going to tell us we got to have them. We're competing with these other communities. We don't have them. This development's going to happen. I don't know. I have seen some studies, nationally, a lot of this development would happen anyway. Not all of it, maybe, but a lot of it would happen whether you give them exemptions or not. We're just giving revenue away. And I say that not as somebody who necessarily likes higher taxes. What I do like is broad tax bases. I think everybody should pay for their government. And when the tax base is broader, it puts less upward pressure on taxes.
Yeah, here's what I'm struggling with a little bit is I'm all for getting rid of the incentives of new builds on the outskirts of towns, right? That increase the amount of services that are needed, the amount of sewer, cops, snowplows, that kind of thing. But I think we should still consider incentives to get people to infill or, downtown, that kind of, and that's where the controversy comes. I think about Bismarck, that's always been a controversy. The builders and the folks that are building on the outsides of towns are like, why don't I get the same incentives as the downtown businesses? And I would say the reason for that is you're creating an expenditure, but downtown they're not. So I also think, Josh's point of the $1,600 coming from the state can replace some of these tax incentives that are in place already.
Good time.
The people won't feel the pain. So I don't know if I'm ready to say get rid of all of them, but I think we can be more targeted.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Not throw away all of them, but we need to look at them again. Right. Some of them need to be ended.
And I also think this is one of those places, Rob, where people who I generally disagree on everything. Sort of the far right, sort of the rabble rousers. I think I talked about this during the Measure 4 campaign. I think Tony Garrett brings up some good points in Fargo in terms of incentives and why are we incentivizing businesses who are already coming here? Because that costs me money as a taxpayer. So I think there's real conversations to be had that can ideologically can be across the board.
If we're going to do it, though, I feel like, because one thing I do want to avoid is if Fargo gets rid of them, but maybe if West Fargo keeps them, and now West Fargo can poach things from Fargo, or Grand Forks can poach or whatever. In fact, that happened not that long ago. I think there was Fargo offered an incentive. I think FedEx was maybe going to build something in Grand Forks, and then Fargo offered a cushier package, so they moved down to Fargo. And that happened several years ago. I don't remember all that.
Yeah, but let's play this out. So more like Moorhead and Fargo, right? East Grand Forks and Grand Forks. Those things are always going to take place in different jurisdictions.
Not a lot the state of North Dakota can do, but I think we could probably stop some of it within the state. Right. But I agree with you. Infill is the way to go. If you're refurbing an old building and turning it into new office space or new apartments or something, it's already got sewer, it's already got water, police are already protecting that area, fire's already protecting that area. It's just different than if you're building a new housing development out on the edge of town. That's a different matter. And I think we need to start treating these things differently. And it'll be interesting to see how the politics of it break down, because I got to think the people who are doing the development on the edge of town, those are probably different companies than the sort who are maybe more focusing on it. Maybe I'm reading that wrong. I'm familiar.
And I also think, sometimes when we talk about downtown or infill sort of things, there are
downtown.
Right. But like TIF districts and those kind of things, Renaissance zones, people who don't like those things because they're not getting them for their developments in North Bismarck or whatever, will say it's corruption or all these different things. I think, again, we need to cool the language a little bit and figure out what the best policy is for the taxpayers and for the citizens of these communities. I also, and we've talked about development when we had Smart Towns on. I think we both heard from some developers after the fact. The reality is developers have a huge amount of political clout in these communities, and people like to grow, right? But we can grow and be smart about it, not have to give away the farm for the city in order to grow.
Well, some of it too, we can improve some of our neighborhoods. I look around Minot, I drive through and they're still nice houses, but they're little shoe boxes that were built in another age. And you think about, well, what could happen if we replace some of these houses, over time through attrition. Somebody, and it's starting to happen in my neighborhood. There's been a couple of houses that have been torn down. Certainly saw a lot of it after the flood. A lot of those houses just had to be torn down and replaced, and it can revitalize the community and create the sort of housing that modern buyers want to buy. I mean, modern buyers don't want to buy in a 1940s style shoebox. They want something maybe a little bigger. It's got some updated things, and I think that we could focus on some of that sort of development, and also without getting into treating our communities like gerbil cages, because I think you can go too far with it, where it's only this sort of development's allowed. We really, all I want at the end of the day is I just want this stuff priced appropriately, and there's no question that greenfield development on the edge of town has a much different impact on taxpayers than infill does.
And I also think that, like, me personally may have a unique perspective on this because I am somebody who wants to live in the core, right? Living out with all the green space and all that isn't as appealing to me as having my house that's 6 blocks from downtown Bismarck. We can walk to our schools, all those kind of things. So I also understand the political reality of I'm probably unique. You said, people don't want to buy that 1940s style small house. That's what I was looking for when I started looking, right? I mean, so there's like, how do you make sure that we don't have winners and losers? People are able to do what they do. I think your point, though, that we just need to price these things properly is exactly right. If that's what you want, you need to pay for those services in a different way than maybe some folks who live in the core.
And then you let the market sort it out. People can buy what they want, and the market, the developers will pursue the market, but it's got to be priced appropriately. And right now we are giving a heavy, heavy subsidy to, I know the developers don't like it when we say this, but we are giving a heavy, heavy subsidy to those greenfield developments, not least of which is what we just discussed in Fargo with a single family home. We're exempting for the first 2 years. That's perfect for a developer. I mean, it helps them move their product, and then they're out of it. Once they've built it, it's sold to somebody, they're out. And now it's, but the home buyer is going to be there for 15, 20, 30 years, their mortgage. The city obviously is going to have to deal with it, effectively forever. So we've really got to rethink some of that. To me, that is the next big battle line in the ongoing property tax reform, because the legislature didn't, what they did was great first step, but it was the first step. We got a lot further to go. So,
and I just want to make it clear, I don't think either of us are against developers and the idea of developing land to make a profit. And there's a lot of people who are super successful. And I mean, I have friends that come back to Bismarck after being gone for 15 years and like, holy cow, this is like a different place, both in downtown, but also around the X. Like, we need those kind of people. But again, I think they're doing okay without incentivizing.
And also, it's not just people want those developments; they want to live in those developments, and that is great. I don't begrudge them. I wouldn't mind living in one of those developments. Although I'm also kind of like, I bought my childhood home. I live in a very well established neighborhood. I'm a block away from my son's school. We're 4 or 5 blocks away from my daughter's school. It's great. But again, priced appropriately. All right, we're going to go. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, I don't want to be done. I'm not done with you yet, Port. I'm not done with you yet. I still want to talk a little bit more about property taxes.
Okay.
Because I think one of the things that's going to be interesting over the coming 6 months or so is this idea of not all communities, not all political subdivisions are the same. And thinking about, and I look forward to your reporting on this, quite frankly, that I was shocked by the comments from West Fargo saying, this is great. We're just fine doing this. And Mayor
Brzezinski from Grand Forks, very similar message. And even if you're looking below, like county, city governments, you look at the Park District in Minot, they have been saying it's just fine. And those are just a few examples off the top of my head. I'm sure we could go around and find a lot of other local leaders, park districts, school districts, whatever, saying, yeah, we can do this.
So I think that the interesting thing is the people who are going to be have trouble with the 3% cap. Is it political subs who already had budget issues, which I think we're sort of seeing in Fargo? And then we might see some who don't have a sales tax base, but are big enough where they have big budgets to see how that will work. But I'm really interested in who's struggling with this cap and why they're struggling with this cap. I think ultimately people are probably going to be okay by and large, but we're going to have these one-off situations where local political subs are like, this is terrible. This is, the sky is falling. But I think most will be fine.
I think I think the spotlight is probably going to be thrown on some communities or some jurisdictions that probably made some unwise decisions, whether those decisions came from the voters, whether they came from elected leaders. I think, they're going to be kind of cast in the spotlight, and they may have some tough sledding ahead of them, but that's not a problem with property tax reform that the legislature passed. That is a problem specific to those communities. And that's where we need to keep the debate, because to fix it, they got to live within their means.
Right. You can't just blame every financial issue of a political sub on this 3% cap when stuff was going to hit the fan.
Well, again, the legislators themselves are out looking. I mean, they said even as they pass this, they know they're going to have to tweak things. Right. But it's just that give and play. Like, we're all just going to have to be grown-ups about this. And don't point the finger, take blame when it's appropriate, look for appropriate fixes, and roll this out. But I think we're on a good path. I think that reform passed by the legislature, it was championed by Governor Armstrong, has put us on a very, very good trajectory. We've already got some meaningful changes. I think there's more ahead of us.
I think the other interesting thing is, and Josh touched on this a little bit, as we start dealing with stripper wells and federal money going away and all those can we maintain the $1,600? And what happens if we can't do the $1,600 and it becomes $1,000 or $1,200 or something like that? What's the pushback from the public then? Because now we're going to have this expectation, right? And if any effort to go below $1,600 is not going to be well received. So what does the future economic outlook for the state look like? Because I think there's some bumps ahead that we need to be prepared for.
I think they maintain it because it's money. I mean, really, at the end of the day, it's just another buy down. It's money going from the state to the local government. The money, that $1,600 in funding is not going away. We're just changing which of the taxpayers' pockets it's coming out of. I suspect it's going to be maintained, but I think the state is going to have some tough decisions to make as federal cuts set in, as some of these other factors come to play. But that's it's tough to predict what all that's going to be.
Well, Rob, it's been fun talking about property taxes again. It's been like a month probably.
Yeah.
After.
Hey, this is going to be an ongoing debate, and I would argue it's arguably the most important debate in our state right now.
Right.
One of them. All right, we're going to go. Remember, you can always leave us a voicemail, send us a text, 701-587-3141. Follow us on all the things, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, X, at Plain Talk ND as our handle on all of them. Also, we had a great reaction to the first episode of our producer, Matt Fern's podcast, the $740,000 question, taking a deep dive into the film grants controversy that I've written extensively about. Now, Matt is taking a deep dive into it. Those episodes will be on the Plain Talk feed. So if you're already subscribed to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're getting your podcasts, you will get the new episodes. You can watch them on Plain Talk on the YouTube feed, or you can go to filmnorthdakota.com. That'll take you straight there. You can watch on all those platforms. He's got another episode dropping on Friday.
Can't wait.
Which it'll be, by the time you're listening to this episode, that episode should be available. So you definitely want to check that out. And then I believe there'll be a third episode after that as well in the following week. So please stay tuned. I'm listening, even though he interviewed me for the show as well, and I've reported on it, I'm listening as anxiously as everybody else. It's a very, very interesting story and an important story. Not just, maybe you don't care about film grants. This is, as I've said before, a fascinating window into how business gets done in North Dakota sometimes. And it's not very pretty. So all that being said, we're going to end the show there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host, Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
you ask a lot of people, we still drove the bus this last legislative session and got a lot of good things done. So no matter what the size of the car, we can get there.